So they let me meet him. I put my proposal down. His jaw dropped, and he said, "We can't do that. You're asking us to treat you like you're an intelligence service." I am an intelligence service, and I'm the only one that counts. I'm the one that gets the job done in Iraq. And I convinced the Israelis that this was right. From 1994 to 1998, I traveled to Israel more times than I can count. I worked with the Israelis on a very intimate basis. In photo labs, shoulder to shoulder with guys, looking at imagery, working with guys on intercepted communications, working with people on human intelligence networks to gather the information they had. Then I would take that information, create an inspection, go to Iraq, do the inspection, prove some of the information right, prove some of the information wrong, come back, rinse, repeat, do it again until they don't have any more information to give us, meaning we're doing the job right. When I started my cooperation with Israel, Iraq was the number one threat. That's in 1984. When I finished my work with Israel in 1998, Iraq was the number 6 threat and falling. And that's solely because of the work that we had done. We had convinced the Israelis that the Iraqis were no longer a threat. When I started my work, the Israelis' number one mission was to kill Saddam Hussein. When I finished it, their strategic assessment team had come up with the conclusion that Saddam was a rational actor and that Israel could live in a Middle East where Saddam Hussein was the president of Iraq. And that's because of the work that I did. I'm very proud of this. But when you work with the Israelis day to day by day, you can't help but recognize them as people, as humans. And they are. They're human beings. On the weekends, I would go to their houses, we'd have barbecues, and I got to meet the families, and we'd laugh and we'd cry. The same thing, I recognized them as humans. I said, these are human beings. And they talked to me very openly about the problems, because one of the things that happened every time I went to Israel, from 1994 to 1998, is there was a terrorist explosion. Sometimes they blew up the restaurant that I ate at the day before. That would be Hamas. Sometimes they blew up a bus. Sometimes they blew up Dizengoff Shopping Center. Sometimes they blew up the discotheque underneath my hotel. People were dying every time I visited, and I watched how the Israeli people responded to this. And it was interesting because when I first got there, the Prime Minister of Israel was named Yitzhak Rabin. And he's a man who, and I know today I've learned a lot, but he's a man who embraced something called the Oslo Accords. I understand today it's not necessarily the cure-all that I thought it was at the time, but when I talked to the Israelis, they all said the same thing. For instance, I went to the home of one Israeli lieutenant colonel, and he pointed up at a hill, and you could see behind the hill on the crest a mosque sticking up, so it was a Palestinian village on the other side of the hill. And he said, "You know what that is?" I said, "No, I don't know." He said, "That's the green line." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's what separates us from them. And if we want to have peace with the Palestinians, you're a Marine, what is that?" And I said, "That's high ground." He said, "What happens in high ground?" I said, "You put an observation team up there and you can see everything down here and adjust fire on it and kill everybody." He said, "Yes, my family's down here. Do you understand why we have to have peace with the Palestinians?" I said, "I think I'm getting the picture." And they believed it. This is the same guy on that fateful day in November of 1995, as we drove by a square. He said, "Scott, I know you like to go out and see things while you're, when you're off hours. Yitzhak Rabin's going to be giving a peace talk tonight, a peace rally. Don't go there." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because they're going to kill him." I said, "Who? Hamas?" He said, "No. The Israelis are going to kill him. The right-wing Israelis." And that night, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated and killed. And that's the day that Israel changed, because from that moment on, instead of Yitzhak Rabin, the name that was being spoke was Benjamin Netanyahu. And it was a different guy. The guy that does the strategic assessments, when I left, I told you that Iraq was the number one, or had gone from the number 1 threat to the number 6 threat. In May of 1998, what was the number 1 threat to Israel? Right-wing Israeli extremists. The Israeli government recognized that that was the danger. That was the threat. And so when I left Israel, and I have to say, when I left Israel, I knew the Palestinians, we always spoke about them. They're over there. They're over here. They're over here. It was they, though. It wasn't people, it was a concept. And the concept was very nebulous for me. I didn't really pay that much attention because I also linked the concept to Hamas, and I linked Hamas to terrorism. So I wasn't really into learning more about them. That was an Israeli problem, to make peace with them. And I trusted the Israelis that they were going to be honest in the pursuit of peace in the same way that they were honest in supporting me to do my job in Iraq. I saw the Israelis change their opinion about Saddam Hussein. And so I believed in my heart of hearts that the Israelis could find a way to make peace with the Palestinians. So I never took the chance to see you, to learn about you, to identify with you. I just treated you as them over there. But then I watched my friends, the Israelis, change. And it's broke my heart because I watched the Israelis become something I didn't identify with. In 2009, I traveled back to Israel with my wife, and we were driving and there was a wall. And I said, what the hell is that? Well, that was the wall that they built to separate Israel from the West Bank. And I said, but that's a ghetto wall. Israel can't build a ghetto wall. Israel, you understand your own history, don't you? You understand what happened to you in World War II. You understand that you used to live behind that wall, and you know what happened to you when were you behind that wall. Why are you putting people behind a wall? And I couldn't get an answer. They wouldn't talk to me. And then I realized that Israel had changed. And it changed, and it changed, and it changed. And I no longer viewed the Israelis as I used to view them. But I hadn't changed my mind about the Palestinians because you were still them. You were those people, but I didn't identify with you. I just know that Israel had changed. October 7th changed everything for me. I'm a military guy. I study war, I study things. And on October 7th, the whole world was waking up saying that this huge terrorist attack took place. And I said, it doesn't look like a terrorist attack to me. And I started breaking it down. And I've written an article about it. It was very controversial, but I called it the greatest military raid in modern history, what Hamas did. It was a military raid. And then I started to break it down, go back and to listen to Hamas, to listen to the Palestinians, to empower myself with knowledge and information. And I started to realize that it wasn't just a military raid, it was a military raid in a just cause. That the Palestinians actually were right in this case. I started viewing the Palestinians at first, I said, you're an occupied nation. You are a people who are being occupied by the Israelis, but you're still not humans to me. You're still them, but now I put another word in there, occupied. But then the Israeli reaction started to come in, and I started to learn about mowing the grass. I started to learn about the Dahiwa doctrine. I might be saying that name wrong. It's the West Beirut suburb that was bombed in 2006 by the Israelis, not because there was military significance, but because they wanted to punish the people of Lebanon for daring to allow Hezbollah to resist the Israelis. And I said, they're going to do that against Gaza, and they did. And they started killing the Palestinians, innocent Palestinian civilians. They started butchering them. And I started to cry. I started to realize that these are human beings that are dying. What would I do if those were my children? What would I do if that was my wife? And I know damn well what I would do. I would pick up a gun and I would resist. And I would fight them with every inch, every parcel of my soul. And I would never stop fighting until they were defeated. And defeat means until they stop occupying my land, until they stop oppressing me, until they give me what they insist they have for themselves, which is a homeland they can call their own. What kind of double standard is it where we say Israel gets to exist, but Palestine doesn't get to exist? And it goes on, and the death and destruction keeps piling up, and it just breaks my heart. I am shattered. I'm a shattered human being when I look at the situation that's going on in Gaza today. Because if more Americans had taken the time to see you as human beings, instead of walking by you, to look at you and say, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, I believe in you. If we had done that decades ago, we could have avoided this. We could have put pressure on Israel. We might have come up with an alternative path, but we turned a blind eye to you. We pretended you didn't exist. That was a problem over there until it became a problem that could not be ignored anymore. A problem that when I turn on the internet and I see a child dead, or a child buried under the rubble, or a mother walking her son across the street and she's shot by a sniper. And you see this and you say, how can the world tolerate that? And the next day something even more happens. They drop food and let the hungry people go to the food, then they drop a bomb on the food. And yet the world does nothing. The world does nothing. And that's where we are today. I'm ashamed to be an American in this situation because we are to blame, the United States of America. We empowered Israel to do what they're doing. And here we are at this horrible situation where the only way Palestine is going to become a state is if more Palestinians die. That's where we're at. We cannot allow the people who have died to die in vain. These martyrs are the heroes of the future Palestinian state. Every Palestinian who sheds his or her blood in Gaza is not shedding their blood in vain. They're shedding it for the future of a free Palestine. And we have to honor them. We have to respect them. We have to say that if this is going to happen, then at least let it happen in a cause worthy of the sacrifice, and a free Palestinian state is such a cause. But to get there, we're going to have to start seeing you collectively as a nation. And that's what my goal is right now, moving forward. As I told you, I'm late to this. I'm Johnny come lately, and I apologize for that. I apologize that I didn't see you before, that I didn't recognize you before. I see you now. I recognize you now. And I give you my solemn word as a man that I will never forget you, and I will always be beside you as you fight for what you deserve, a free Palestine. So now that I've bared my soul to you, any questions? Is that what we're going to do?
Yeah, we'll do some Q&A, but before we start Q&A, I want to ask you 3 specific questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And we're getting you a water bottle. I see you.
You see me sweating?
Yeah, I see you sweating.
That happens when you get nervous.
So you already kind of mentioned the shift in Israeli society after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, but maybe if you can go into a little more detail and talk about how they were going essentially from a center-right government to Ben-Gvir. How did that process take place over the last 2 decades?
Okay. Again, I don't claim to be a Middle East expert. If you wanted to ask me about Russia and the Soviet Union, I'd be more comfortable giving an answer, although there's some people out there who might say, you don't even have that right, Mr. Ritter, and that's okay. My whole journey in life is about learning, accumulating knowledge, and reassessing as the facts come in. The Israel that let's put it this way, on the day of Yitzhak Rabin's assassination, I woke up that morning hopeful because we were getting ready to do a really cool project that involved the King of Jordan and me traveling to Jordan to meet with the king, with Israeli intelligence, to do an intercept of gyros that were being brought in from Russia, and we're just like, this is going to be sort of earth-shaking. We're going to be working in a collaborative fashion with Jordan. And then that night, the world came to an end. Yitzhak Rabin was dead, and Israel shut down. The guy that told me not to go to the rally was talking to me about what was happening in Israel at that time. The Soviet Union had collapsed, and Israel was being inundated with immigrants doing aliyah, I guess is the term, people who were Jewish or claimed to be Jewish, coming from Ukraine, coming from Russia to the Jewish homeland. And they were coming in large numbers, hundreds of thousands of them, and the demographic shift was real, but it was also the political shift. You see, the Israelis that believed in Yitzhak Rabin saw you. They saw Palestinians, and they realized they had to live in peace with the Palestinians. The Israelis that were coming in, they didn't see Palestinians. They saw subhumans. They saw people that they didn't identify as humans. They saw people that they felt were denying them their God-given right to a Jewish homeland. And this mindset became empowered as the political pendulum started swinging to the right, where these people now are empowering politicians who would never be able to make it to parliament, but now they have votes, they're in parliament, they become a minority sect, and then they become a swing vote, and then they get in power. And that's how you get where you are today, where Benjamin Netanyahu, if he assembled a parliament derived from sane Israelis, even hardcore Israelis, but they're not insane. Israelis that still see the Palestinians and recognize a need to deal with the Palestinians as a people. But these have been pushed to the side, and now you have political parties that view the Palestinians as animals. And they literally view them as animals, and they treat them as animals, and they kill them like animals. And yet, nothing's done because Israel has become a nation where that mindset is the norm. And that's the Israel of today, which now I'm going to make a statement that would probably get you thrown off of YouTube. But I used to be a huge supporter of the state of Israel. I used to be somebody that said that the state of Israel had a right to exist. I'm here to say right now that just like Nazi Germany lost the right to exist, just like any nation that has deviated off the course of fundamental human values loses the right to exist, just like my own country may lose the right to exist if we don't right our course, Israel has lost the right to exist. The Israeli state, as it's currently manifested, is an evil on this world. It is a cancer that is consuming this world, and it cannot be allowed to exist. And this is another reason why I support the Palestinian cause, because I believe that the Palestinians do look at Israelis and see humans. I believe that the Palestinians look at Jews and see fellow worshipers of the book. That when you see the people in Israel, not necessarily the criminals, but the normal people, you don't view them as animals, as dogs, you don't want to kill them, that you are capable of living together in peace with neighbors who have different religions and different ethnic backgrounds. So I am confident when I say that I support a free Palestine, that I'm not supporting the Arab version of Israel. Israel, as it's currently manifested, has no right to exist, and it should be every human being who aspires to be called a human being, everybody who embraces humanity's goal and objective, to see this Israel, as it's currently manifested, removed from the pages of history.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll open it up to members of the audience to ask questions. So, at the start of this war, after October 7th, you were one of the first people to essentially make clear that there's absolutely no way that Israel is going to be able to go into the Gaza Strip and succeed militarily, especially after stating their objective, which is to completely destroy and remove Hamas. And obviously, you've stated that you can't really destroy Hamas because Hamas is an idea, right? It's the idea of resistance. So what I want to ask you, especially because of your experience and your background in the military, I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this. Hamas has survived 6 months. They were under blockade and siege prior to this, but now there's nothing you have to assume is going in. How have they survived this long, and how much longer can they survive?
Okay. Hamas has been in the resistance business for a long time. The leader of Hamas, Yahweh Sinwar, is that his name? I might be mispronouncing the first name. Yeah, I apologize for that. I mispronounce my own name sometimes. So I'm a Marine, what do you want? But Mr. Sinwar has written a very interesting book called, I think it's A Thorn in the Carnation. And it's a sort of a memoir, it's a fictionalized memoir, but he talks about growing up as a child of the camp. And you got to read this book to answer this question. Because in 2023, if you're a child in Gaza, your parents were born in Gaza, and your parents are going to die in Gaza. And you look at that and you realize that if nothing changes, you were born in Gaza, and you will die in Gaza. And any children you have and you bring into this world will be born into Gaza and will die in Gaza, children of the camps. People like to say that Hamas isn't the people of Gaza. Where the hell did they come from? Excuse my language, but Hamas is the people of Gaza. Hamas came from the people of Gaza. Hamas are the children of the camps. They know Gaza like the back of their hand. And if you read Mr. Sinwar's book, he talks about how he came to know the Israelis and to understand the Israelis by being in prison so long, watching them. This isn't Hamas's first rodeo. 2014, they fought a big conflict with Israel. They learned the importance of tunnels, I think, at that time, or reinforced that. And Hamas is a resistance organization that adapts to new realities. They understood what kind of firepower Israel could bring. Hamas was realistic about they knew, I believe, that they couldn't prevent Israel from bombing Gaza. Hamas cannot prevent Israel from bombing Gaza. The only people that can prevent Israel from bombing Gaza is the world. And the only way you're going to get the world to support you is to allow Israel to bomb Gaza and inflict such horrific harm on the people of Gaza that the world turns against Israel. I believe that this was built into the Hamas plan. Now, some people will again say, well, that's so heartless. These are cruel people. How dare they sacrifice so many innocents? These were children who were born in the camp and are going to die in the camp. Does it matter how they die? They're going to die prisoners, slaves of Israel, no matter what. The only chance to break that paradigm was October 7th, to begin a process that compels Israel to be Israel. And what I mean by that is, when you have a nation state that has as its official military policy the notion of mowing the grass, which is a war crime, but they do it anyways. When this is their official policy, you can't say we didn't know Israel was going to do this. Hamas knew very well what Israel was going to do. Israel was going to bomb the civilian population of Gaza because Israel couldn't bomb Hamas because Hamas was underground. And Hamas knew they were underground. Hamas built a battle plan based upon being underground. Hamas not only has supplies for sustained conflict, and again, it's not me saying this. My understanding is that Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, recently had a meeting with I think the name of the brigade is the Al-Qassam Brigade. Is that the
Al-Qassam Brigade?
Al-Qassam. Again, you're lucky I knew it began with a Q, because my brain doesn't work that good sometimes. But they met, and Nasrallah was saying, do you need us to come in now? Do you need us to do something? In my understanding, and this is based upon Nasrallah's people, that Qassam said, no, we got this under control. And according to the figures coming out from Nasrallah, only 10% of the Hamas fighters have been killed. Now, the United States believes 35% have been killed. But either way, you ain't defeating Hamas with those numbers, because that means there's a lot of fighters left that are still doing the job. What we do know is Israel's taken prohibitive casualties. The Israeli army is reeling, and it's not necessarily the number of dead. We don't need to focus on that. It's the number of wounded, and it's the psychology attached to the issue of casualties. Israel is a nation that's not used to sustaining casualties on this scope and this scale. And the material losses are out of this world. 84 Merkava tanks, gone. 84 Merkava tanks, the most modern tank in the world, gone. And they can't defend themselves. Wherever the Israelis are in Gaza, they're being hit continuously. It doesn't mean they're losing territory, because that's not how this war is fought. This war is not fought by arrows above ground. This war is fought by maneuvers underground. And Hamas right now is maneuvering freely. They have built a tunnel system that's designed to be resilient. They know the Israelis search for tunnels because the Israelis did that in 2014. So they built a plan around that, and they're still surviving. The other thing is, how did Hamas survive all this time anyways? Weren't they under block? Didn't they have Kogat and have all these Israeli groups out there blocking them, preventing the Egyptians? Shame on the Egyptians. Were never supporting them fully. How did Hamas get supplies? They're expert smugglers. You don't think Hamas continues to smuggle? You don't think Hamas has backup plans? I don't disrespect them that much. When Hamas says we have the ability to continue this fight, that we are not worried, that means Hamas had a plan that both stockpiled munitions, food, water, and brought in the ability to resupply. And that plan is succeeding, and this is why the Israelis are panicked. Israel has set the conditions of victory to be absolute. The total eradication of Hamas as a military organization, and the total eradication of Hamas as a political entity. The political entity, though, what is Hamas? Hamas has stopped being just a political organization, just a resistance movement. Hamas is more than just an ideology. Hamas is Palestine. Hamas is Palestine. And the reason why I say that, you're going to say, well, Scott, isn't it the Palestinian Liberation Organization? Isn't there Fatah? I say yes, but where are they? Where is Fatah? Where is the PLO? They're KIA, spiritually. And the point is, today, if there were free and fair elections in Palestine, Hamas would win hands down. They'd win the presidency, they'd win the legislative body, they'd own it. But this is something that the Russians recognize. The Russians brought a delegation from Hamas and a delegation from the Palestinian Liberation Organization to Moscow to sit down and work out a realistic plan for unity government. Now, some people say, well, doesn't that dilute what Hamas has accomplished? Understand that Hamas has become a political problem for itself. Because it has survived, because it has made itself a symbol of the Palestinian people, it complicates any potential peace agreement to say Hamas will be the representative of the Palestinian people. By going to Moscow, by working with the Russians, Hamas is allowing itself to be part of, an important part of, whatever future governing authority will be. And it's one that, because it won't be called Hamas, the United States and Israel will have to do business with. So Hamas is very smart. These are some smart people, my belief. Militarily, Hamas isn't even close to being defeated yet. Ask the Israelis. If Hamas was being defeated, why do the Israelis go to bed every night in Gaza scared to death of what's going to happen? Why do they hunker down? Why do they dig in? They're not walking freely. They're scared because at any moment, a Hamas fighter can pop up from the ruins, from a tunnel, fire off one of his upgraded RPG warheads, kill them, wound them. Thousands of Israelis are in the hospital, numbers larger than the Israeli government can admit, because to admit these numbers would break the spirit of the Israeli people. Israel right now needed an emergency infusion of around 12,500 troops. They needed to call out reserves. Nobody wants to show up. If you're winning the war, everybody wants to show up. Israel's not winning the war. Israel's losing the war. And Israel's talking about expanding the war against Hezbollah, but they don't really mean it because they can't fight Hezbollah, and they know it. Israel's trying to bluff the United States into doing something that will help tip the balance in their favor, but now we come back to the original premise of Hamas. You're not going to have a free and independent Palestinian state unless the world is on your side. And let's be honest, on October 6th, how many friends could the people of Palestine count? You couldn't even fill up one hand. You couldn't even fill up one hand. The world had turned their backs on you. Well, they made good words about you. Oh, we believe in the Palestinian state. Oh, we believe in Nobody believed in that. The Egyptians didn't believe, the Saudis didn't believe, the Jordanians didn't believe, the Syrians didn't believe it. Nobody believed it. Nobody was doing anything. Everybody was bending over backwards to make economic deals with the Israelis because that was the future. After October 7th, the world changed. On October 8th, it changed again. October 9th, as it progressed, as the Israelis began to expose the reality of who they are and what they are, the world started to turn. Today, you have the world turning against Israel, and today you have more nations than ever that say that there must be, this problem doesn't end without a free and independent Palestine. Now, it's not going to be easy to get there. Nobody's fooling themselves in that, but I'm just telling that you're in such a strong position today, so much stronger than you were on October 6th. And that's because of the resistance, and that's because of the heroism and the sacrifice of the Palestinian people.
Well said, thank you. So I think we'll open it up now for some questions from the audience, but before we do, first I want to thank Brother Hatton in the back for sponsoring this venue here. He's a good friend of ours. He's always supporting us and everyone in the community, so love you, Brother Hatton. Thank you very much. I'd also like to solicit some support. If there are any potential donors in the crowd, I'd like you to know that we're going to put a QR code up here, and you can scan that QR code and you can make a contribution to our Stripe account, which would be very helpful to not only continue our work in the form of video production, but also bringing you guests like Scott Ritter. Scott, when was the last time you were in Tampa?
January 1991, on my way to Saudi Arabia for the Gulf War.
1991, and it's now 2024. Who brought him here? We did, and we can keep bringing people like Scott, and hopefully we'll bring Scott back, several times. I hope in the future. But we can do that with your support. So please consider making a contribution.
Only if your AI program gives me different talking points.
Yeah, we'll get to work right on that. Don't worry. Okay, so do we have anyone in the crowd who'd like to ask a question? Okay, so I'm going to walk around and pass the mic one by one to folks. I'll start on the left side first. I want to make clear, these are questions, not comments. So don't go on a rant, and please don't try to teach Scott Ritter history, right? Because he knows a lot more than you do. So
Well, no, I can be taught. I want to be taught.
Is there any weapons that we haven't seen from the Axis of Resistance or Israel that have been yet to be used?
I believe that Hezbollah is sitting on an arsenal of weapons that have yet to be revealed. These are weapons of a strategic nature, and what I mean by that is that they will be able to hit Israel in ways that Israel has never been hit before, in targets that Hezbollah has never been able to strike before, in depths that, in ranges that have never been done before. And if Iran were to enter it, I believe Iran has new generations of weapons likewise that will prove themselves to be capable of overcoming Israeli defenses. So I do believe that. I don't think Hamas is sitting on any secret weapons. I think their secret weapon is this new design RPG tandem warhead that's just devastating the Israelis. I don't think the Israelis expected that weapon to be as effective as it was. But what Hamas has is courage and local knowledge. They're children of the camps. They're fighting in their own backyard. You ain't gonna beat a streetwise kid fighting in his own backyard.
So I'm not sure if there's even a proper answer for this one, but I guess you could try to answer it as easily or as briefly as possible. And I follow you on Twitter, and I see you kind of went to this topic a few times before. But going back to what you were saying earlier about how Israel can do as they please with practically no, complete impunity. They don't care about what the international community says. I guess my question is, how do we get to this point where Israel or Zionists control the narrative so much to where they're literally the only country in the entire world that can do this and get away with it, and people just turn a complete blind eye? I mean, imagine if Russia had killed 30,000, mostly women and children, in the last 5 months alone. I think, and then the only thing you hear from the White House is, "Oh, please be careful. Please be careful."
Right.
But 20,000 women and children. So my question is, how do we get to this point, I guess as briefly as possible, to where they control the narrative so much, and they are the only country in the world that can actually get away with this?
Okay. My mind has been evolving on this one. I'll give you what I used to give you as the answer, and then I'll tell you what my new answer is and why I believe it's changed. My original answer is that the Israeli government has bought the United States Congress.
Yep.
The Israeli government has bought the presidency, and that through leveraging, irresponsibly leveraging the Holocaust, the legacy of the Holocaust, and by exaggerating Israel's history. Look, in the United States, I grew up watching Paul Newman in Exodus. Dude's good looking, man. He makes a very compelling hero. And the story was compelling too. And you fall in love with the narrative of Israel. And America was brainwashed into believing that Israel is good, and therefore we didn't object when we had pro-Israeli policies without reflecting on why we had pro-Israeli policies, until we realized that we don't support what Israel's doing, but we're powerless. We, the people, don't support, but we're powerless because Israel has bought our Congress through the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. I mean, they brag right now on their website, $100 million on the table to buy Congress. They just say that's what they're going to do. And so my original answer was because Israel has bought America, and that America can't act because Israel has done that. But then I don't accept that, and I'll tell you why I don't accept that. Because at the end of the day, America is a nation state. We're a sovereign state. Nobody can buy us. We bought ourselves. This is my new answer. And this is going to get me in a lot of trouble. I just will start off, I guess I have to say that I'm not anti-Semitic at all. I'm not Jewish, I'm a Christian, I'm not Muslim, but I respect the Islamic faith, I respect the Jewish faith. I understand the modern history of the Jews. I understand the Holocaust. I understand never again. I condemn Nazi Germany for the crimes they perpetrated against the Jewish people. I condemn all governments that have singled out the Jewish people for hardship. So what I'm about to say cannot be, please don't construe it that I am somehow anti-Jewish. I'm not. But American Jews have used Israel as a way of leveraging control over America. So it's America that has bought America. And you can't sit there and say, well, those sneaky Jews. Everybody does it. Every political interest out there seeks to buy influence in America, whether you're a commercial interest, big pharma, or you're a narrow ethnic religious interest, Jews. And not all American Jews buy into this. This is a specific kind of American Jew who has used Israel as a cause, Zionism as a cause, to take control of a system that enriches them. It's not about doing right by Israel. It's about using Israel to do right by them here in America, to give them political power in America, to give them economic power in America, to allow them to dominate mainstream media, to control the narrative. That's why it's impossible right now. Not because Israel bought us out, because we can solve that problem that quick, just by cutting off the funding. Instantly done. But we can't cut off the funding because we're funding ourselves. And the people that are getting the funding will never cut off the funding. They will always use Israel as an excuse to empower themselves here in the United States. So the problem isn't Israel per se. The problem is interests in America that use Israel as a means of controlling the narrative here in the United States and achieving political power by buying the United States Congress. I used to insist that AIPAC would have to register as a foreign agent. I used to insist on that. But nowadays I don't insist on that because they're not foreign agents. They're Americans who are using Israel to seize control of the United States. And the reason why I think it's important is you can't solve a problem unless you first accurately define it. Think about it. If I'm trying to solve a problem but I haven't accurately defined it, for instance, if I'm saying the problem of breaking the grip of the Israeli lobby on the United States is derived from Israeli control of it, but it's really the American Jewish community that's in control, I'm focusing on the wrong problem. I'm not solving the problem. Now, I could be wrong. The people who believe that Israel is behind this could be right, but my point is it's a complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue, and we have to get it right if we're going to solve that problem. And it's a problem that is desperate need of a solution.
We have a question.
Okay, I lost the microphone, sorry.
Scott, what do you think about September 11th? Do you believe it was an inside job?
Very similar.
I'm not gonna, no. Look, I can't claim to know enough about it to come up with it, but this is how I approach life, because I was an intelligence officer who have dealt with a lot of really weird problems in my life. And I've seen things, and I've seen how the system works. There's a couple things about 9/11. For it to be an inside job, too many men and women like myself, people of honor, who took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and are prepared to lay our lives down at a moment's notice in defense of that concept. People who believe that, sincerely believe that, would have to compromise that value. Because you can't carry out a conspiracy of this complexity and not have anybody come out and say, hey, I was on the inside, I was there the day when this happened. So I mitigate against that because I say, where are the whistleblowers? There's not anything, you've seen this in the United States. If we have a scandal, people come out and start talking about it. because Americans don't know how to keep their mouth shut. You know, we want the headlines. We want our 15 minutes of fame. We want a Hollywood movie, but nobody's come out and done that. So there's that.
Building number 8. Bring us number 7.
No, we could building number 7.
Israelis dancing above the bank.
I know all this, but I also believe that you know, things happen. But I can't take an isolated event and draw a sweeping conclusion from that isolated event. You have to connect the dots, and the biggest dot for me to cross is that men of honor would have had to violate their oath to make this happen. The other thing is, I was a firefighter in New York, not New York City, upstate New York, volunteer. But I had a relationship with Hazmat 1. They all died that day. I met with many firefighters who were there, and they talk about it. I met with firefighters that dealt with Building 7. All right? Everything they explained to me was based upon natural fire phenomena. And these are the experts. These are the firefighters. Now, I know people are going to say, well, so-and-so said this, so-and-so is going to say that. I'm just telling you that I met the chief that watched the crack in Building 7 and called the collapse because the building was on fire inside from gas and it was expanding. And that's his story. I'm not here to contradict him, or I'm just saying that's the story he told me as a firefighter. It sounds plausible. So that's where I stand on 9/11. I believe that 19 men hijacked 4 airplanes and did horrible things with those weapons. They weaponized those airplanes. That's where I stand. I could be wrong. I'm open-minded.
Important if this happened again. I mean, one of our biggest fear now, they're going to create something similar to 9/11, and they're going to put a.
We have to guard against that.
Is that going to fly now?
Question
Do you
and
see
answer
that
going.
flying these days? Or
Yeah.
what do you-
Look,
Let's keep the question and answer going.
I'll just answer it this way, though. You come at it from a different perspective than I do. I'm white and I'm not Muslim. All right, so after 9/11, I didn't have to worry about what happened when I walked the street. You did. So you have a lot more skin in this game than I do, and therefore, that's why I'm not dismissive of your point of view. I respect your point of view, and I understand the urgency of the question and the need to get it right. I get that.
Hello, Scott. First of all, I want to thank you for coming over here. It's always a good thing to see for a non-minority person speak what we already know. So thank you, and I applaud you for that. I have a comment and a question will come shortly. This takes less than a minute, I promise. 1948, a major catastrophe happened. The Socialist Party won elections in South Africa. 50 years later, apartheid was happening, but it was done by 1994. No land takeover, but a lot of massacres happened, and 30 years from that date, South Africans still have a hard time fighting their way through the apartheid they went through for 50 years. I don't see a viable two-state solution working in Palestine. Land takeover, the amount of death that happened in the past 76 years almost is unequivocal if anything that has happened. Everybody keeps on talking about two-state solution. The maps have changed from 48 till today. Gaza, the way it is today, is not what it was in 67. The West Bank is not the way it is today. I don't see a viable solution for how a two-state solution will stand. What is your vision of what a two-state solution will even look like? And how long will it take for that part of the world to experience what we think democracy is?
Okay.
So, Scott, just for the sake of time, and there's several other people who have questions, if you could try to answer the question, but in as brief a fashion as you can.
That could be a mission impossible, but I'll do my best. Again, I have to say that I'm not an expert on Oslo. I'm not an expert on the original two-state formula and all this. I have talked to people who have told me that, just like you, that a two-state solution is unrealistic, isn't going to happen. And I'm not disagreeing with you. What I would say is this: getting from A to Z, you don't go straight from A to Z. There's a lot of letters in between. And right now you have a world community that has turned against Israel. And the vast majority of that world community is talking about supporting a free and independent Palestine. And if you insist on a one-state solution, you may close the door on the opportunity that Hamas has created. That doesn't mean that you're giving up on a one-state solution, because I agree with you, a two-state solution isn't viable. But what happens is, as well-meaning people enter to the negotiations about creating a Palestine on the premise of a two-state solution, and then they realize how unworkable it is, but they've already committed to the necessity of a free and independent Palestine, that they will gravitate to a one-state solution. And so I think that's the direction that this is going to go, because I do agree with you that it's far too complicated right now to talk about, especially a Oslo-style two-state. But the world right now is committed to a free and independent Palestine. I believe that those discussions are going to happen, but I believe that discussions are going to start with a two-state formula. But as they move forward, I think the realities that you talked about are going to compel a one-state solution.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, remember, let's keep the questions short and quick, okay?
Hey Scott, my name is Saleh. I've got a quick question for you. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Irish Republican Army, but how do they compare to Hamas? And it's a two-part question. How does the Irish Republican Army compare to Hamas in terms of resistance? And what made the Irish Republican Army successful that Hamas is not doing?
I mean, you're dealing with the similarities are religion and a commitment to religion. My understanding is Hamas is please forgive me if I get this wrong, but it's an Islamist-based resistance.
Yes.
And the IRA derived its strength from the Catholic population of Northern Ireland and Ireland. So you have faith in there, so they're both doing faith. The IRA had support amongst the people that made it a very difficult problem, because you can't defeat. It's not about killing a fighter, because if you kill the fighter, 5 more grow. In Hamas, it's an endless, as long as there's a citizen in Gaza, you have a Hamas resistance fighter. They will regenerate themselves. So I think the IRA had a lot of international support that Hamas doesn't have, but Hamas does have some international support. They get supplies from the Axis of Resistance and things of that nature. You want me to, what is Hamas doing wrong? I don't understand where that part of your question comes from. I see Hamas doing everything right. I see Hamas starting off from an impossible position that nobody ever thought they could succeed, and today they're succeeding beyond anybody's wildest imagination. They're an embarrassment to everybody who said Hamas couldn't do what they're doing. Hamas is also working in a much more compressed timeline, in a much more violent environment. The IRA never had to worry about Belfast being leveled by the British Air Force. So the violence of Northern Ireland was spread out over many, many years. The violence in Gaza is compressed into 6 months. I think Hamas is doing a very good job. I think that the model of resistance, of legitimate resistance derived from a people who have the same vision, the same aspiration, is a successful model of resistance. So I think that there's a lot more in common between Hamas and the IRA than there are differences.
Okay, 2 more questions on this side. When you're done asking the question, however, if you can pass it to me, you guys ask the question. Scott, if you try to answer
Okay.
both questions back to back, if you can.
Thanks, Scott, for coming out. So just had a question on just the sentiments of your colleagues in the armed forces, whether they're currently serving or retired, on the situation. Is it reflective of just the popular kind of current in the country, or especially in the light of Aaron Burnell's suicide, what effect or how do they feel about the situation? So that's
Okay.
my thought.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, Scott. I was curious about your time in Iraq with inspecting WMDs. I believe originally we sold the WMDs to Iraq. I believe it was gas weapons that you were inspecting. If you could just expand on the specifics of the WMDs. I believe it was a figure of 99% of the serial numbers were found of those WMDs. And also, what were your interactions with the Iraqis like? Were they trying to hide
quickly on the military, I don't have connectivity with the current generation of military people. I'm 62 years old, and I left the military in the mid-1990s. And my peer group is, the ones that stayed in, they're retiring right now. They're done. What I can say is that the people that I interact with, it's a mixed bag. There's a large number of people who've drank the Kool-Aid, and they are Israel, love it or leave it, Israel right or wrong. God bless America. America is linked to Israel, and you're never going to change my mind. And they call me a traitor, and they call me horrible names, and it is what it is. There's another group of people who are just the opposite. These are people who feel betrayed by their government. They're people who enlisted in good faith after 9/11 and then experienced what they experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're open to the notion that the American government not only can get it wrong, but is getting it wrong, and they're far more sympathetic to critical thinking when it comes to American policy and the willingness to believe that Israel perhaps is doing something wrong. There's a large number of those people. And then there's the biggest number, though, is just the gray people, the people who did their duty and then they left and they go back home, and that's it. They're living their lives. And now these are the people that were me, because they're not seeing you. They're not evil people. They just don't see you. You're not part of their lives. You don't resonate with them, and so therefore they tune out that problem. They tune it out, and they ignore it. They focus on other issues, and that, I think, is the vast majority of the prior service people that I dealt with. They've just tuned it out. With Iraq, first of all, we don't want to disparage the Iraqis. These were indigenous weapons programs. They're product of Iraqi scientists who were very capable. But they required technology that Iraq didn't have, so they had to procure this technology. Iraq didn't buy chemical weapons from anybody. Iraq bought the means necessary to produce chemical weapons. So they bought the precursor chemicals, they bought the industrial components. They came in, they assembled their own chemical weapons plant, and they produced chemical weapons. The same thing with biological weapons, the same thing with nuclear weapons. They received the designs of calutrons and centrifuges, and they built their own. I think they modified the Iraqi Scud missile. They're very careful. Iraq made a decision after the war ended, when they were told they have to disarm. The first decision they made is that they're going to hold on to certain amounts of their weapons of mass destruction because, one, they needed to deter Israel. They had to make sure that if Israel thought that Saddam was weak and made a move on it, that they could strike back with chemical weapons and biological weapons as a means of deterrence. They also were afraid of Iran. A lot of people don't realize when the Gulf War ended, Iran massed a whole bunch of troops, over 1 million troops on the border, and were threatening, were supporting a Shia uprising in the south, and Iraq was very concerned about Iran, so they retained a certain capability. Biological and nuclear, they didn't declare at all. They said, we don't have them, because even though they didn't have viable weapons, to admit this, they felt would have kept the inspections going on forever. And what Iraq wanted to do is get the inspections done. About the summer of 1991, the first summer, they realized that the inspectors weren't going away, that we were pretty darn good at our job. And so the Iraqis, what they did is they knew that eventually we'd find the weapons they were hiding. So they blew them all up and buried them underground and didn't declare it to us. They just did it so that we couldn't find anything. But because they brought in people like me, I forensically reverse engineered everything and came up to them and said, we're missing, literally I told them, we're missing 100 missiles. And they said, no, you're not missing 100 missiles. I said, we're missing 100 missiles. And I showed them how we're missing 100 missiles. And finally they admitted they were missing 98. I was off by 2. I'm not perfect. But they admitted that they hid 98 missiles. But they blew them up and they buried them underground. So now I had to go in and dig up the pieces. And then I had to put the pieces together with the serial numbers and match them. Then I had to go to the factory that produced them and match them with production logs. And I had to come back and go through the Iraqi disposition logs. But by the time we finished doing all that, we could account for 96 of 98 missiles. That's pretty good. And we did that with all Iraqi WMD. So by a certain period of time, we could account for about 95% of Iraq's WMD programs, but the standard was 100%. So now we have to get that last 5%. And the Iraqis said, you're not going to get it because it was all blown up. It's not there. We're not hiding anything. But you did hide from us. Remember that first part where I told you they hid weapons? And the people that hid the weapons were Saddam Hussein's personal bodyguards, the presidential security, the Amin al-Alam, and Al-Hamas and all these tribal groups close to Saddam. And so I came back to them and I said, tell me about how you hid them in 1991 so I can make sure you're not doing it today. They said, we're not going to talk to you about that because it's presidential security. So then I had to start inspecting in presidential security, going to presidential palaces, going to different places to reverse engineer the truth. And they blocked me. But every time they blocked me, people said they're blocking you because they're hiding weapons. They weren't hiding weapons. They're trying to stop me from learning about the security of the president because the CIA was attached to my team trying to use the intelligence to kill Saddam. I was on an inspection that I ran in 1996 where the CIA actually used my inspection to create a crisis so that cruise missiles would hit every Special Republican Guard site except one, the 3rd Battalion, which the CIA had recruited their leadership. And so they wipe out the Special Republican Guard, the 3rd Battalion would rise up, march on the palace, kill Saddam, remove him. And the trigger was my inspection. And here's the thing, I didn't know about it. I didn't know this was happening. But while my inspection team was building up, we're going in, the Iraqis had infiltrated the CIA's agent network. The CIA had sent in somebody with a special communications means who was going to receive the signal, and the Iraqis got it, and they kept the guy alive. They basically said, cooperate and we'll kill you quickly when this is done, but your family lives. Don't cooperate, we kill you and we kill your whole family. He said, I cooperate. So he would communicate, send back the signals, and at the right moment when the whole thing was supposed to go bad, the Iraqis got on the phone and told the CIA, hey, thank you very much, we're in charge, goodbye. Hung up the phone, that was the end of the coup. But I looked stupid. Imagine being me, who's a hard-nosed guy, saying that I have every right to go to that presidential palace. I have every right to do this because you've lied to me. And they come back and say, you're nothing but a CIA stooge who's trying to set up our president for assassination. And now every time I go into Iraq, I have to be worried that they're going to think that I am that, and they're going to take me and put me up against the wall and blow my brains out. I had more than one gun put up against my head by an Iraqi security officer who threatened to put my brain matter on a wall because of what the CIA did. Because of what the CIA, but the Iraqis, the security service, fear is like blood to a shark. And the moment you show fear, they own you. And so I just had to walk right back in there and dare them to shoot me. And they backed down and eventually came to the truth. And now we know the truth, that Iraq did in fact get rid of all their weapons of mass destruction in the summer of 1991, and that there was no weapons of mass destruction at the time that the Gulf War started in 2003.
Okay, moving over to this side, we have just a couple of minutes left. I'm sure Scott would like to maybe take some pictures of folks after if they'd like. So let's just take 1 or 2 more questions. We'll keep it brief, and then we'll wrap up.
I don't want to break their cameras.
Hey Scott, thanks for coming out. So as a Palestinian myself who comes from the West Bank and regularly visits a lot, I just can't help but think, based off of my personal experiences, seeing the treatment of the Palestinians, specifically friends, family members, and myself, visiting. What kind of sparked my interest was your consistent going back and forth to Israel. My first question basically is, when you were there, how much communication would you say there was between the PLO, Hamas, and the Israeli government, or between Israel and Fatah and Israel and Hamas separately, compared to what you think might be going on today? And by that, what I mean is, how corrupt would you suggest that the current PLO is against their own people? And the second one's a pretty quick question. Is there realistic, before initially I was thinking, that Hamas wouldn't, survive more than 6 months, quote unquote, like many people suggested, but now I'm more, towards the side of, well, it seems like Israel is more in trouble. So because of that, how likely do you think there would be Western involvement in this war rather than the initial thought of Iran or Hezbollah being involved because Hamas needed help? Thank you.
On the second part, I don't think there's going to be Western involvement in this war. First of all, right now the world is trying to come to grips to solve a problem, and that's the problem of a Palestinian state. How do we get to that point? How do we, because the fighting will end. I think everybody recognizes that Israel has lost. Israel recognizes that it has lost. So the question is now, how do you get from this very difficult situation to a negotiating table? But that cannot happen if this war expands. If Hezbollah jumps in, that's a big problem. Suddenly all the sacrifice of every Gazan who sacrificed here, every person in the West Bank who sacrificed, will be pushed aside, and they'll be talking about an even bigger amount of violence taking place in Lebanon that could expand and include Iran. The last thing anybody in the axis of resistance wants is an expanded war, because they all recognize there's victory at hand. It may not seem like it, but there's victory at hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamas has won. Now, when I say Hamas has won, that's like saying that the Soviet Union won after the Battle of Kursk in August of 1943. They did. Germany was never going to win that war after that point, but you still had a whole bunch of fighting left to do before Nazi Germany went away. Hamas has won, but there's still a whole bunch of struggle and fighting left to do. But Hamas has turned the corner. The world has turned against Israel. Israel is faced with an impossible problem that the Israeli military now recognizes as an impossible problem, and the West is not going to jump in and save Israel. Pressure is going to be put on Chuck Schumer, who's one of the biggest AIPAC buyouts you've ever seen, is starting to change his tune, because he's recognizing that what Israel's doing is bad for America. The State Department recognizes that Israel has done more harm to America's reputation abroad than anything else. America is going to start to shift and change and demand that Israel make concessions. So that's the direction we're heading, and so I don't see an expansive conflict. The other question was about, okay, I left Israel in 1998, and I left in June of 1998. So, and that's the last time I had meaningful interaction with Israeli authorities. Prior to that, I had a lot of meaningful interaction with Israeli authorities. What I will say about, at that time, let me put it in perspective. I worked with the CIA station chief there because of the nature of the intelligence cooperation. I was bringing in classified imagery that I was working with the Israelis, so it had to be stored at the U.S. Embassy. So I worked with the station chief, and I was familiar with what he was doing. The CIA was an intermediary between the PLO and the Israeli government. They played sort of like a trusted broker role. And the Israelis and the CIA believe that Yasser Arafat and the PLO were the most corrupt entities on the face of the earth. But they had to deal with them because that was the face. Hamas was a terrorist organization, but it hadn't morphed into, we hadn't had the elections in Gaza, we didn't have the divide, we didn't have Hamas taking de facto control over Gaza at that point in time. Hamas was still considered a terrorist entity. The principal focus on governance was with the Palestinian Liberation, or the PLA Authority and Fatah and all that. But the perception I got from both the Israelis and the CIA was that Yasser Arafat was one of the more corrupted people, and that the Fatah was likewise by that point in time more interested in what's good for Fatah and less interested in what's good for the Palestinian people. But remember, I wasn't leading that negotiation. This is just based upon drinking beer or in a bar, listen to people talk. So I could be a little off, but that's my perception. Pardon? Okay. So.
I think we can take one more question. Does anyone have a question on this side?
Hey Scott, thank you again for coming out. So you commented earlier that on October 6th that you count the amount of friends that Palestine had in one hand. And October 7th happened, and social media went out and created platforms like Propaganda & Co. to do great work and elevated your platform to another level. Essentially just educated Americans, especially young Americans, as to the truth is what's going on overseas. So now with the potential TikTok ban in Senate happening, what are your thoughts on that, and what could be next with any kind of ban like that?
Okay. Is everybody here familiar with the term Luddite?
I've heard of it, but I forgot what it means.
Well, Luddite, in short, is me. A Luddite is somebody who is not very good at technology, who rejects technology. I'm a simple kind of guy. When I joined the Marine Corps, we didn't have computers. I did things with a map, an acetate overlay, a grease pencil, a compass, and we wrote out our our communiques on what we call yellow canaries, and then we had Morse code that we could send it, or we sent runners. What I'm trying to get at is you're looking at a real dinosaur when it comes to what's going on in this social media thing. I became involved in social media as a platform to inform. I think the modern social, because I always wrote, and I wrote for online magazines and things like that, but that to me was the same as writing for a paper. For me, the process was the same. I wrote an article, I submitted it to an editor, the editor made recommendations, I altered it, it got published. Whether it got published in a hard copy or it got published online, didn't matter. It wasn't until this, the Russia thing, in the lead up to the special military operation, that people started calling me up and asking me to be on podcasts. And I was totally unfamiliar with that. And I did it. And I think the first podcast I did got 1.5 million views in a couple days. And then everybody started calling me, and I didn't understand why everybody was calling me. I thought it's because they liked me. No, they liked the views. Because apparently social media is about the number of views, the number of clicks, the number of exposure, because that turns into something called monetization. And a lot of these people made their living off that, and I'm still totally unfamiliar with that concept. But I have learned that there are influential platforms. YouTube is one of the more influential platforms. It's a good thing to be on YouTube, unless you care about your message, because YouTube doesn't care about your message. I just got banned from YouTube, and they're telling me that this is a lifetime ban. I ain't coming back. And it's because of my stance on Israel. It's because of some of the things that I said here today got picked up, and the YouTube people shut it down. And so I'm done with YouTube. But I've also learned that you have a backup plan called Rumble and Facebook and X now. You can stream on X and you can do this. And my point is, there's a whole world out there of social media driven alternative media. And that's where Propaganda & Co. comes in, because these guys are the pros. They know what they're doing. One of the reasons why I'm here isn't just to talk to you, and this is the highlight of my trip here, but it's also because I got kicked off of YouTube. And how do I continue to work losing that platform? How do you continue? Because for a Luddite like me, I can just go back to writing articles and sending them to editors and they get published someplace. That's a proven model. But what I've learned is that you guys are here not because of an article I wrote and published in TruthDig or published on my Substack. You're here probably because of a video I made with somebody, and you watched it and you said, I like that, and then you searched and you found more videos, and then you expanded. That's the social media universe out there that exists today, and it's essential if you're going to get your message out. It's essential that you know how to navigate those waters. And these guys are the ship's captains right here, and so that's why I'm here to work with them to see if there's a way that my product can help them and that their product can help me, because if we don't collaborate, we get shut down. If we don't collaborate, we don't come up with an alternative to YouTube, they'll shut us down. You know, and what's next? I mean, X, I was banned on X when it was Twitter. Elon Musk came in and he brought me back, but I don't know how long that's going to last, because eventually I'm going to say something or do something or tweet something that even Elon Musk can't protect me from, and then they'll ban me from X. And then, you know, and then eventually I'll have no choice but to just go back to writing articles and submitting them and getting published in very narrow forms, unless I find an alliance and